The topic is big data and analytics, and our moderator today will be Larry Williams. Larry is the president and CEO of the Beacon Council, which is the Miami-Dade County Economic Development Organization. And so Larry will be leading the discussion, and he'll be introducing his panelists. But let's give him a strong round of applause just to welcome them. Thank you so much.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Ralph, and thank you to everyone for being here today. We've got short time and some great content that we want to go through today, so I'm really going to dive right in. As we want to talk about big data and analytics and really how it's helping cities to be smarter. You know, by 2050, about 70% of the Earth's population is going to be in our urban centers. You know, increasingly data is being used to really, you know, for everything from the management of the cities, for our construction, and how do we deliver services. And so the information that's being generated can really help us have better connectivity with the citizenry and the residents of all of the areas. And we've got two great experts, of people that are really, you know, enthusiastic about this subject. And we'll be talking about what we can do as cities so that they can be better managed and better run. And so with us today, we have Dr. Bernie Meyerson. He's the Vice President of Innovation at IBM. And also Emilio Diaz, who's the Executive Vice President at Indra. And so they both not only bring great perspective from the technology point of view, but a great global perspective as well. So I'm just going to kick off a question. And, you know, Bernie, you know, really talk about how does creating a smarter city enable smarter governance? You know, that idea that the connection of smarter infrastructure, how it leads to important things to empower the population itself.
One of the most critical aspects of smarter cities is that it's driven by data. You know, we hate to admit this, but you understand that most of government is basically you lick your finger and see which way the wind is blowing. I mean, it's not because people don't want the data, it wasn't available. As you start to be able to get quantitative data to assess what's happening in your environment, you can do some pretty remarkable things. I mean, people are inherently good. Yeah, you'll have the outliers, but the fact of the matter is, even if you present the population with the hard data on their impact, for instance, on the environment, they will inherently cooperate with you to clean that up, literally on an individual basis. And if you provide that data to the government can actually act in an informed fashion against a very specific challenge and have metrics, have real numbers to tell whether it's a success. You don't have to wait to take a poll during the next election to see if you're popular. So it really helps you bring time to result down to a dramatically shorter time than in the current system.
Emilio, how do you think that the big data really helps create better government and better governance?
Well, I think that the government or the city becomes to be smart when they are able to prevent the events and to make decisions prior to happen. I think that technology is the basis for that. No? Talking about big data, I think that big data gives to us the capabilities to take a lot of information coming from different situations, different sources, and really allows to us, or allows to the government to make decisions more accurate, more close to the citizens. Really, I think that we have to take in account that the citizens that we have now in the cities, they change so much. There are people that are connected. There are people that like to be informed, that like to have all the information available about the city where they are living, or about another cities. No? Then I think that it's so important tools like big data to reinforce the smart cities, the concept of the smart cities.
Yeah. So this concept of big data can really sort of be way up here, but as we think about how we bring it down to the citizenry, to the residents, and how it affects people's lives, how can the analytics of the big data really bring it down and start to not only improve people's lives, but how can we use it to affect people's behavior and drive their behavior?
I'll start. There are good examples of this. The fact of the matter is, as a simple example, in terms of improving people's lives, the point about big data is not observing what happened in the past and avoiding a repeat of some problem. I mean, that's the easy stuff. The whole point of big data is being able to quantitatively assess what's going to happen in the future and change history. And as odd as that sounds, and it sounds very extreme, you know, I'm just going to change the future. That sounds like science fiction, but it's not. As a trivial example, if you monitor the traffic in a city, as we did for a year about in Singapore, where you would literally monitor the position of virtually every vehicle crossing every threshold to the city, you can actually build a quantitative model as to the behavior of traffic. Why is that important? Because if you show me what we've got now, I will tell you 20 minutes there'll be a traffic jam that does not yet exist. Now, a normal traffic report, you live in Miami, we just hear, we're stuck, I know that. But leaving that aside, if you live someplace where it moves occasionally, the fact of the matter is, if you can predict in 20 minutes there will be a traffic jam, you can use the same information to figure out how to avoid it by diverting some tiny fraction of the vehicles to another location by either changing the pricing of roads, which is what they do in Singapore, changing light sequencing. So you literally can issue this remarkable traffic report. You would have been stuck, but don't sweat it, there won't be a jam. As opposed to, you are stuck, here's why, or even worse, you're stuck, I have no idea why. So it's a very different scenario when you can change the future, and that's incredibly powerful. It's not something we do today routinely, but it is coming.
Very good. Emilio?
Well, I think that that is important. The first thing that we have to do is to put the citizen in the center of the process. The citizen has to be for us, for the people that work in technology or for the government, to put in the center in the process is not only people taking information, it's people that is taking information, is sending information for the platforms, is talking about traffic is very important when you are in a road and you are saying online how is the traffic there. No? But just to talk about another thing that is important, I think, is smart grids. From my point of view, we need smart grids. You cannot talk about smart cities if you are not talking about smart grids. And really, I think that we have a very good advance in this kind of technology. I think that there are three things that we are able, like technology companies, that we are able to give to our citizens. Case that is real-time monitoring of the consumptions. What we call smart metering. We have to be able to integrate the renewable energy, that is going to be so important in the future. And also, I think that is so important for government and citizens, the tools that allows to us to reduce the consumption of energy, the reduction of CO2 and that is so important. I think that is going to be is ready in this moment, and we have to implement in the big cities that we have in this moment. No?
You know, we're really talking a lot about how do we get it to the citizens and the residents, and I think a company would call that a customer-focused approach to it. What is the end that we have in mind? A lot of the technology is there. What are the barriers that you're seeing and the challenges for the implementation? And do you have any examples of any cities that are getting it right, that are doing it well?
Look, I mean, there are tremendous challenges, and the number one challenge, as you undoubtedly all agree, is going to be privacy. You know, there's an inherent thing. It's Big Brother, right? I'm looking over your shoulder to see what you're doing, but don't worry, I'm here to help.
Yep.
Yeah. That doesn't always sell really well, and it's a huge barrier to overcome. People have to be comfortable that you truly can anonymize data. And that's just one of the, because in order to help somebody, at least in general, by understanding the population, you need the data. Now, anonymization technology has come a long way, and the only way I can explain it usually is it's finally gotten to the point that people believe that if you have an algorithm that does anonymization, that also enables you to take that data and de-anonymize it. My only answer to that is if you put a pig through a grinder, you get a sausage, but you put the sausage backwards through the grinder, you don't get a pig. You know, but it's a huge challenge. I mean, you've seen the headlines. I'm not going to go into them. You know them already. But the cities that get it right are the ones that have figured out how to take the data and do an upmix so that by the time you get all done, they're only working with metadata. You've really hidden the data in the individual. But you nonetheless get a sense of the population. You get a sense of where the issues are. It's like a participatory government where you can do almost a blind survey instantaneously and say, I want to build a school here. What is the impact? and get input from tens of thousands of the citizens without identifying them individually, but nonetheless, talk about a public forum. It's incredibly powerful. And there are cities that are beginning to do this, that are surveying blind for noise levels and other things of that sort. But it is a tremendous challenge, and frankly, they don't even want to be called out, to be blunt, because there is this question of, are you violating my privacy? It's a challenge.
So privacy is a huge issue.
Talking different barriers, I think that one of the big problems is the investment that you need. It's a very good barrier, a very big barrier that we have. Also, I think that the organization that the local administration has really is not the, you have different departments, different people that is working in the government, but really you need a leadership only in one place of the town. No? You need a budget, unified budget. You need a team working across all the organization of the administration, local and federal, just to do this kind of project. No? Also, really, I think that the collaboration between the different agencies, the different agents that are implied in this kind of projects is the main barrier that we find when we are going to implement a project in a town. No?
That's two very interesting perspectives. We think about the individual privacy that's needed as well, and then the long-term thinking by policymakers that could actually think about, you know, how do you meet the short-term challenge of the investment you need to make today for the longer-term benefits of the community in the future. And as communities are going through, really just societies are just going through rapid transformation, both in the society, in our cities, in the infrastructure that's going on. Where do you think some areas of priority are? If you have, you've got limited resources, where do you start?
How much time have you got? No. About 18 minutes and 11 seconds.
20 minutes. You have 20 minutes for you.
There you go. Anytime. This is the oldest story. You sort of start at the top. For instance, healthcare is a dramatic, crying need, and it differs country by country. There is no one answer. But as an example, Singapore. I serve on the Land and Livability Government Advisory Group. And there you have the aging population because the birth rate has dropped dramatically. It's about 1.4 per couple, which basically means you're going to have a dramatic shift to basically to an elderly society. So there they are, in fact, as an example, using data, hardcore electronic medical records, optimization in real time, looking at treatment and outcomes. I mean, they're doing it right. And there is a huge priority around healthcare. And the Geezer Fest in the United States, of which I'm part of it, the Geezer Fest is also going to drive the same healthcare issues. Not that you're excused, but in all seriousness, guys, you understand that you want to talk about the fundamental issue right there, healthcare. We could have 14 others, but I'll stay with that. See, only 2 minutes.
Well done. Healthcare.
I will choose citizen security and urban mobility. No? I think that in this kind of countries that are growing so much in this moment, I think that for sure e-health is another thing more important. But really, working in urban mobility and all that has to see with improve the security of the citizen is so important in this kind of countries. Brazil or Colombia or
And in mobility, you're talking transportation and transit, and really, the way that they can connect to different areas and get around in this context. Well, there are a lot of cities that are growing the fastest. And if we think about some of those situations in the countries that are growing the fastest, we can think about Africa, but let's think about Latin America. How are those cities able to capture, both the data of the big data as well as the analytics? Because analytics is such the critical part of this right now, and really help it to create a new future for those rapidly growing cities in Latin America, for example.
Well, one example I would use is Rio. I mean, in Rio, you have the control center, which is basically one of the most advanced big data / operations control centers in Latin America. And as you know, there was a terrible series of floods back in 2010, which resulted in the deaths of well over 100 citizens. And the mayor simply put his foot down and said, no more, this is ridiculous. But what he did was, and it's a tremendous combination, you basically combine some of the supercomputing capabilities we have, which can predict rainfall with about 1/144th, roughly, the area of what we do in the US. Putting it another way, we can predict rainfall in roughly a square kilometer, as opposed to 144 square kilometers where people normally do it. You take that data, you know where it's going to rain in the city with great precision, you mix it with the topographic data, basically, and then you mix it with the actual local street data that says what streets are paved, is this a favela with unpaved hillsides and homes that might collapse, and you predict well in advance, far in advance, where the real issues exist and move the population out of the way instead of responding to a disaster after it's happened. Once again, it's really about changing the future, and you're altering the future by saving lives, and you'll never know because they weren't there to be injured to begin with. It's a very powerful tool, and they do it very well, but you have to collect an incredible amount of data about the environment you're dealing with, between the topography and the rainfall and everything else, climactic data to predict the rainfall that accurately. It's a tremendous challenge, but it can be done. I mean, there's lots of evidence that says it's doable, and there are cities that are very good examples of doing it.
Great.
Talking about Rio, you know that I live in Sao Paulo. I would like to congratulate to IBM because they did a very good job there in Rio. I have the opportunity to see the command center that you made there, and really it was a very good command center. It's not so good like the ones that we did in Buenos Aires. It's in Buenos Aires.
Okay, you couldn't resist.
But it's similar. Well, this is another example talking about security. Is we made the command and control center for Buenos Aires, that is a city with 40 million people living there, and really they can manage from there every emergency that they have, and it's a very good experience for Latin America. We have another good example talking about urban mobility in Curitiba. Curitiba is a town that is in the south of Brazil that really they are invested so much in mobility and have a sustainability town, and really we have the opportunity to make for them the implementation of a new urban system to manage all the buses, all the collective transports, and really it's a very good experience that can be used in other countries, in other cities in the countries of Latin America. I think that this could be the best example is in Rio, and after that.
Well, Curitiba has certainly exercised a lot of leadership. Jaime Lerner is certainly somebody who's leaned in and implemented technology to benefit from it. Yep. Two things that we've mentioned in this conversation is both sort of transportation, mobility, and then also safety and security. There were some first responders that we're talking about, and they're asked the question, what is their biggest fear as first responders to be able to get somewhere? And what came out was actually a traffic jam. Was their biggest fear, their inability to be able to get to where they needed to be. And so how can we use things like mobile technology? We're all running around with these devices, in our pockets and in our cars, but how can we use that to really start getting that real-time data, analyzing it in real time, and then making decisions to be able to help things like traffic pattern? You touched on it, Bernie, but how do we implement it in a real world?
Well, there are a couple of different extremes. In the extreme where a society like Singapore is very heavily instrumented already, that's relatively easy because you've already got the data, you just have to use it. In a case like you're describing, where you have a nation where the city is growing at huge pace, the infrastructure is not there, mobile devices are an incredible source of data if you can get past the privacy. Because, for instance, a mobile device will tell you, because GPS is very accurate, that this person is sitting in traffic on a freeway. They are not walking down the street. Why? Because they're walking down the middle of the freeway. They're probably in a car. Now, if you're willing to share that data, and people do, by the way, how many here use Waze? I rest my case. You're giving up your privacy, right? You're sharing your location data and your speed data, but right there you already have a way to take that data and convert it into a path for the first responders to get to the place they're going. So, similarly, you could take lots of other data. In a society where there's noise problems, you could ask the same permission you ask of the folks who use Waze to turn on the microphone and just monitor the noise level randomly every 20 minutes to see if there are hotspots in the city where the noise is out of control. I mean, All of this data can be gathered as long as the population is informed of what you're doing, you get their explicit permission, and then you run it through the proper set of analytics to direct the people where they need to go.
Very good.
Living in Sao Paulo, you need to use Waze. It's impossible to live without Waze there, no?
I was going to say helicopter, but...
Well, but talking about this kind of project, I think that the integration between GPS and the mobility systems is so important. We talk about Curitiba. We have another reference in Medellin, in Colombia, that really we connected all the ITS, all the panels with information, with the buses, with the GPS that is allocated in the bus. And really it's so important, and that connected to the traffic light, and really the system is so complex, but it's able to keep the green light because the bus is close to the crows, and really in these two towns we have reference. They were finished in 2012 and 2013, and really we have reference that the traffic is going better. Really, the people is using more the public transportation, and really I think that we have a lot of work to do there, but there are some experience that could be considered good experience in this situation.
The subject of privacy has come up several times, so let's investigate that. Let's drill down in that a little bit more. How do we ensure the right level of privacy, the right level of security for the residents, and where's the line between, really enhancing someone's quality of life and crossing the line into being too invasive? Talk about that.
You're asking almost a personal question of the individual.
Okay.
And my own take there's a different answer for every human. So what you do is you let an opt-in, opt-out. There is a trade-off. You have to be willing to give up a certain amount of your personal privacy if you're going to basically make progress in medicine, because when you're trying to track back, for instance, a genetic issue, you have to be identified. If you want to do genetics, guess what? Sorry about that, but that's just how it is. The flip side of the coin is the benefit can be incredible. A discovery of a gene that gives you a predisposition to some sort of disease that's horrific and gives you a warning to look for it early is very powerful. The trick is you have to figure out how to protect that information to keep it from being used against you. And that's where it gets very tricky, because cyber right now is an enormous issue. I won't get into which company, but as you probably know, there was a large retail chain in the US that actually lost something like 110 million records if you total up what they lost between credit cards and then the records on their own cards. 110 million, that's pretty much the household count in the United States. Yeah. You probably want to get better at it than that. But it is a very tough trade-off, and people will have to sort of take some level of risk for some level of benefit.
Nothing else. I think that we have to respect the law. No? It's important to respect the local laws about the privacy, and really you define very good is a trade-off between the benefit that you are going to have with if you share your information with the government or with another actors, another players, and really it's a trade-off that for me I think that if you want to evolve, if you want to have a very good, better life, I think that it's important to share that information.
Very good. The sources of data is also changing as well. To date, most of the data sources is text-based, and the analytics that go into it are text-based. But it's so rapidly changing to video, facial recognition, audio, using our devices as sensors. Talk about how that's moving very quickly and how the analytics will be able to keep up with sorting that data and applying it back to the real world.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. It's something on the order of 6 to 9 orders of magnitude of additional data about to land on us. If you think about just electronic medical records alone, where you get 1 billion medical images that have to be rendered in high definition into imagery and stored electronically, I see all these storage guys making big investments out there. It's an enormous challenge, to be quite honest. The rate at which data is coming in dwarfs the rate at which you could possibly store it. It outpaces it by orders of magnitude. So you have to start being very intelligent. You have to start moving literally the intelligence to the edge of the network so that you actually are filtering the data as it comes in real time. So instead of having this huge funnel that just takes the world's data and dumps it on some poor unsuspecting system, which then chokes, You actually want at each point as you go down to whittle off the stuff that you don't need. Having a highway sensor tell you that every car is going 68 miles an hour every time probably is not adding a lot of data. Figure a way to compress it. So it's an enormous challenge. There is no contest right now. Data is being generated at a rate that dwarfs our ability to deal with it as a whole. So there'll be a lot more intelligence in the process. And running a city is going to be the same issue. It's a very different game.
I think that the technology companies has to continue working on this way. We have to develop cheaper storage, faster systems to recover that kind of information. But really so important. Not only talk about the structured information, we have to be able to take information from face recognition, but really it's so expensive. It's more expensive. It's not so rapid. And then I think that we have work to do, and the technology company has to work to do.
Great. Well, this has been a great discussion. Let's take a few minutes and open it up for questions from the audience. And I think there are some microphones in the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Wow, you've been very thorough.
Yeah,
one?
A couple. It's also,
okay.
Well, it doesn't matter.
I'm sorry. Okay, one.
Headed that
two,
way already,
yep.
what the heck.
Yep.
So one observation in Miami is that commercial real estate prices can have a big impact in terms of companies' decisions on wanting to leave the city center. And I'm curious to know how these multivariables come into play and how cities might be able to take into consideration those types of decisions.
From a purely mathematical point of view, just take the first derivative, set it to 0, and second derivative positive, and you find the best point. All kidding aside, it's a straight up mathematical. You're right. What you do is it is a multivariate problem. There's not one issue. We're into partial differential equations, but it's the same idea. You are correct. The city needs to be careful. You can actually drive yourself into a ditch. And it may not be the commercial real estate price. It may turn out to be the availability of rational transport. Nobody wants to work there because you can't get there. It's a 4-hour commute from 40 minutes walk away. The bottom line is that this is something that can be done rigorously. It doesn't have to be guesswork. So you're on an important point. I don't know of people, to be honest. You've raised an interesting issue, which I couldn't comment on whether Miami is doing it or not. But it is something that can be done if you're willing to collect enough data. So you've just basically given a very nice example of another area, frankly, where you could address the power of big data.
Another question.
Okay. Yes.
You get the next one.
Okay, I have two questions in one. The first one is about the system approach to data. So when you have like this, what the person said the multivariable situation, like in biology or any other area, that a single set of data might not define the result of your analysis. So how you might merge different data, different nature of data, so that they contribute to the problem that you're working in. This is one thing. And the second, is there any website or some sort of hub where you can get access and like merge different data sources? Because if you're going to be visiting all the data platforms, so your work is going to get with very low efficiency. But if you will have a kind of a website from where you might get the direction to data centers, so you might get that data and integrate the data and do a multi-data or meta data analysis. I don't know how to call that.
Well, talking about the first part of the question is to share information between the different players, you say, that's the question. Well, it's necessary, really, the government has a part of the information, the energy company has another, telecommunication companies have another kind of information, and really you need an agreement between them just to take all that kind of information that in these cases it should be structured information, because the telecommunication companies, the energy companies, the utility companies in general are able to produce a quality and and quality and structured information, basically. I think that the government has to do something in this way. The governments, the city governments, that need to put in contact to all the players and really resolve this situation. And the second part of the question, how is going to flow the data, and where are going all of them, or how are you going to merge? Is that question? I think that the tools that we have ahora, talking about big data or talking analytics, is able to cross all that information and make a good diagnosis, and you can work again with that kind of data. I think that the tools that we have in this moment is able to do all this kind of merge between the information and really go and produce information that is valid for everybody.
You want to add quickly?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, yes, there are tools that actually will look at any literally disparate data set looking for correlations. You don't have to know in advance they're correlated. It will actually crawl through all of it and look to see what correlates. So yes, there are tools out there, and I don't want to crawl through what they are because it's not an advertisement, but the tools exist. There are tools to do what you asked.
That's great.
So Larry, we're going to have to leave that as the last question and the last word. I wanted to thank you, thank the panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.